But reviews, great reviews are not, that's not the textbook of business. It's the complaints that are the textbook of schooling us on what customers want.
Hmm.
It's the complaining customer, believe it or not. And my theory is the complaining customer who's the most valuable guy because they tell us what's wrong, give us the opportunity to fix it. As an example, I read because I'm able to do it because of the size of our property. I read every review that's written and I respond to that. Part of my day is responding to reviews, whether they're net positive, is to say, okay, someone at a higher level is responding to them. I learned a long time ago that in hospitality, especially, actually, probably in any business, the more responsive from the highest level does the most amount of good for the business.
Welcome to Deep Current by Oceans. I'm your host, Kaylor. This is the show built for people who actually run hospitality operations. And today, I'm joined by Larry Siedlick. He's the Chief Experience Officer and serial entrepreneur currently at the Montauk Beach House. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Larry, can you please walk us through who you are, your background, and how you landed in hospitality operations?
Sure. I'm actually a serial entrepreneur. I've had multiple companies over my career. My original company was a medical laboratory company that I ran for 30 years and sold in 2007. And then a financial healthcare company, which we sold. And then I'm not a sit on the beach guy and I don't golf. So I was looking for something to do. And about 15 miles from where I had a house in the Hamptons in New York, there was this old rundown motel from the 1950s and 60s. I thought it looked like it had potential to become a boutique hotel. So I ventured into the hospitality space back in 2012, and it's been a hit since then.
Excellent. Larry, what is a Chief Experience Officer? In this role, what does that mean for you?
Well, I mean, I typically deal with most of the 30,000-foot level things with my management team. One of the things I think that I recognized about changing dynamics since I was started in business, 30 or 40 years ago, was is that it's no longer a customer service mentality that you need to have virtually in any business, especially in hospitality. You need to have an experience. That's what guests are looking for. That's what customers are looking for. They want a total experience. It's not enough just to deliver, in our case, a hotel room. It's more about what's the experience that goes along with that hotel room on the property. I think that's where we switched chief executive officer, chief experience officer, because I spend my time thinking about what's the guest experience totally.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. So, in being a chief experience officer, give us a sense of scale of the property, of how many guests you typically have. What does it look like? Who are you serving? Do you have a team? And if so, how is it distributed?
Well, we do. I absolutely do have a team. I have an operations director, a rooms director, a revenue director, and creative director. Our property, one of the things that we try to do is because we're in an area that has a number of properties, we're blocking off the ocean, and there are a number of properties in Montauk that we would compete with. And so what we decided to do was create an environment where we say we're the social center of Montauk, where music, art, and fashion combine into this experience that we deliver for guests. So we have like for instance, our lobby building is actually an art gallery when you come in, and we spend a lot of time with music and fashion brands on property. So we have 33 rooms, which means we can have just about 80 or 90 guests on any given day. But on say a given weekend in the summer, we're seasonal property. On a given weekend, we would have 300 to 400 people on property
Well,
looking for that, not looking for the room as much as they are looking for that experience.
got it. So now walk me a little bit through what a typical week looks like for you. You've already described what you do as the chief experience officer, but on a, I don't want to say day to day, let's say on a week to week basis, what are you actually spending most of your time on? And I know that can vary from week to week. I mean, roughly.
Well, absolutely. I mean, usually on Mondays we'll have management meetings with the management team because the weekends are our busiest time, where we're virtually through the entire summer um, at 100% occupancy. So we meet with the management team on Mondays. We figure out, what worked, what didn't work, and what we need to change for the following week. And it's a very dynamic, fluid environment where we try and adjust things as we go along.
Okay. Let me come back to that in a moment, but let me ask you this question first. What's the part of your operation that you're most satisfied with right now? Something that you feel that you and your team have built and figured out and that is working great.
I think we figured out that it's the guest has to have a lot of personalized touch. So we spend a lot of time with our staff beginning of the season talking about how we want them to interact with our guests. And if you read our reviews online, you'll see that there's a lot of personal mentions of staff members. There's a lot of saying that the staff is amazingly friendly and helpful. And we have spent a lot of time trying to inculcate that culture into our entire staff.
Okay. I've heard from other guests that when you work on the employee culture, many things fall into place right after. So I'll totally believe that. But if on the flip side of that, what is the hardest part of your job right now that someone from outside of the industry wouldn't appreciate?
Well, I think the hardest part of our job is because we're a seasonal property is probably figuring out what's the best marketing strategy to attract guests that have never been on property. We have a fair amount of returning guests, which is good, but you're not going to have guests. Our theory is that guests will come to the same property maybe 2 or 3 times if they really like it. Then after that, they're like, well, there's other things to do. I want to try something different. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do we make the property look a little bit different each year that we do. We always do, like, for instance, right now, we just updated 16 of our rooms to be a little bit more beachy feel kind of thing that we think that guests are telling us that that's the feel that they want.
Okay, two very important questions out of that from what you just described. One, what is your percentage of returning guests? Do you have that number in your mind?
I would say on average, we probably somewhere between 50 and 60% of our guests are returning guests.
Okay. And how do you know that? What's
Well,
feeding you that information?
we track that, because we're a relatively small operation compared to, say, 1,000 room hotel. We're able to track through our CRM. We're able to track returning guests, and we do spend a lot of time touching those guests when they're not there. So they come onto our email list, and we're giving them updates as to what's going on the property on a regular basis, where we tell them this is the artwork that's going to be on property. We change the artwork as an example every 2 weeks. So we send announcements out saying this is the artist that's going to be on premises. This is the band or the DJ that's going to be on premises this week.
Mhm.
And by touching those guests on a regular basis, it keeps that connection going.
Right. The reason I asked you that question, you said CRM. I think that's great. But anytime I ask that question, I get different answers. Even though we're all in the same industry, for example, I heard somebody say CRMs are overrated in a previous episode and that they're now moving to other types of systems. And I'm still trying to understand what's the stack that's working the best for hospitality. So beyond the CRM, can you walk me through what other systems and tools do you leverage on a day-to-day basis for daily operations, for data, for reporting? What does that look like for you now?
Well, I mean, a lot of that is changing now. I mean, what we've done with our between our social media campaigns and our internal information, we try to combine them. We extract and export that information into now an AI tool that helps us, that kind of that helps us combine it all into an over. So where we know, and we have used some outside help to get some of that done, where we know a huge amount about our customer. We know where they're from, we know what their income levels are, we know what their preferences are, and we're able to target that audience with different messages. So, for
Hmm.
instance, someone in my generation, which is the boomer generation, gets a different kind of a touch than someone who's a millennial or a Gen Z person.
Right. Well, on that note that you're describing, one thing that I hear very consistently, and that's why I asked in the first place, is that the systems are really hard to solve. Many vendors promise integrations, but many properties still record a lot of details manually that should have been automated a while ago. It sounds like you are working toward full integration as much as you can. Do you feel you've achieved a level of maturity in doing that? Or is it a work in progress where there are still pain points that you have?
I think it's still a work in progress for a lot of these venues, and we have looked at quite a number of. But their criticism that they're not fully integrated is absolutely accurate. And I think what we're all hoping is that as AI evolves, that it will be easier to integrate that whole information to one kind of a uh, system. Someone will. You're starting to see some of the vendors incorporating AI into their system. But yeah, I think it's a valid criticism that they don't make it easy to take that information that say you have in your CRM and say, okay, I'm going to generate email out of it. I mean, there's been some that have tried it, but it's not exactly doesn't create the brand identity that you want to create for your property.
In your opinion, what is more valuable? A system that does one thing remarkably well and is very easy to integrate into your broader ecosystem of tools, or a more generally solution that covers multiple aspects without you having to move between different systems?
Well, I think that, I think there's probably some balance there. They can get overwhelming. Like there are tools in most of these products that we've looked at. There are tools in there that people never get to. It's just too much. And there's just you can take someone, bring them on board. They could be the greatest customer service person in the world, but if you overload them with too much, it's very hard for the human mind to adapt to that.
Okay. What right now, out of all of the systems that you have, what is the biggest time sink? What is still the most manual, painful to deal with on a daily basis?
I think it's still a little bit lacking in the communication with like they have tools that let you communicate it, but typically they're add-ons into the system, and they get very quirky when you've got something that's just what they call, for lack of a better term, an add-on piece of software, and it's frustrating that you would like to be able to communicate very easily from one dashboard with text messages, with emails, and with voice messages all integrated into one.
Communication meaning toward guests or internally? What type of communication do you mean?
Well, both. I mean, you want to be able to communicate with guests, which we have systems that do that, but they're not fully integrated as we would like.
Hmm.
But we
Okay.
also want to be able to communicate with the guests pre and post stay. They have systems that will do that, but they're not as automated as I think we would like. It still takes a manual kind of a thing to someone point and click, push this over here, and then send it. Right? We would like it to be a little bit more automated than that. But
Hmm.
the trade-off on that is that if you automate it too much, it becomes a very impersonal message, and that's the challenge. The challenge is you'd ideally like a system that lets you personalize that message back so that it does not look like just like this generic kind of a response.
I agree. And there are things that you could automate when it comes to internal decision making, and others, where we typically try to be careful, or the industry tries to be careful, which have to do with guest communication, as you're describing it, so that it doesn't become cold and repetitive and generic. But on that note of internal systems, then you clearly have a very solid executive team. I mean, you did mention directors across multiple areas. I imagine each one of you need some kind of dashboard to make decisions. So what does reporting look like for you right now? Walk me through when these touch points take place, what's giving you a real-time picture versus what needs somebody to come up with a manual report.
Well, I mean, we do keep a running system of all issues that come up during all guest requests that come up during a given day. And then that gets at the end of the day, the overnight person will forward that to all of the management team. Whether that issue and it covers all issues, doesn't cover like operations guy doesn't get one message, rooms director and revenue person get it. They all get the same message so that they can all have immediate input in it. So the first thing I think that all of my management team, including myself, is doing is we're opening that overnight report, looking at it and saying, okay, which things need to be addressed by one of us immediately.
Okay, that was
So the
actually going to
object
be my
is
next.
that if a guest has an issue during a given day, is that we get it early enough in the morning that if it needs that personal attention, we can contact that guest personally before they leave the property.
So you would say that issues typically have a visibility of minutes, not necessarily hours.
Yeah, I mean, we want, as I'm sure you know, in hospitality and virtually anything, the longer you leave an issue, out there unaddressed, the worse that issue from the customer's point of view becomes. So if you get to those problems early on, then you don't let the guests kind of mull it over in their head and take something that was a relatively minor incident and turn it into a major mountain of problem.
Well, I agree 100%, but you'd be surprised about the different levels of actionability that are across the industry. And that's why I was asking. Some people speak in terms of minutes, some people speak in terms of hours, some people speak in terms of weeks. And honestly, there are issues that you definitely need to address right away. So let's move into the experience piece, which I believe is kind of up your alley. There is one part of experience that often gets overlooked, and it is a pre-arrival window from what I've seen. I mean, you have the guests booking. You have 7 days maybe before they arrive at the hotel, sometimes more, sometimes less, but give or take. And most of the operators that I'm talking to are not doing anything with that time or not leveraging that window in any way. So what does pre-arrival communication look like for you?
Well, other than the reservation confirmation, right now it's limited. But it's funny that you bring this up because it is something that we also agree is a weakness of not only our property but many properties. So we currently have a project that we hope to implement this season is of a pre-arrival inquiry to the guest, asking them what's their plans for their stay. Is there anything that we can do? And the idea is that if they say, oh, I want to do, I love nature. I want to go, I'd love to go do some hiking during my stay. Then the theory is that we have built a database that says, okay, here's all the places you can go in our area that you can go hike. They say, oh, we want, our plan is to just hit some of the best restaurants and stuff. We can say, okay, here's a list of the restaurants in the area. Would you like us to make a reservation? And so we're trying to touch as much on that. But yeah, we agree that is a weakness of virtually most property.
It absolutely is. And where it gets even worse, or maybe even better, I mean, if you're looking at this from the standpoint of opportunity, from what I've read, 15 to 20% of companies in the hospitality industry leave ancillary revenue on the table by not capturing these windows. So, what are some experiences at your property or at this property that you wish more people were aware of and that you were being able to push out a little bit more for that additional revenue that comes beyond the reservations and more about those experiences that you can offer that obviously come with a premium that you wish more customers would just enjoy?
Well, I think that is a weakness of a lot of properties, and I would say we struggle with that also. We One of the problems we ran into is that we wanted guests to be able to other people coming for things like anniversaries and birthdays and weddings and things like that. We wanted to have a seamless system where not that guest, friends of theirs or family of theirs could add, either a gift card on property, or, send wine to the room, or pay for a reservation somewhere. We have all struggled with that idea,
Hmm.
and we do feel like that is a missed opportunity for the hotel.
How will you first address something like that? I mean, again, this is just an example, but hypothetically, let's say a guest is spending $1,200 on rooms. How much more could they be spending on restaurant services and drinks and experiences within the hotel? I think it's a question that begs an answer, right? And again, I think you're not alone there. It is a challenge for the industry, which is why I'm bringing it up. But what would you do first to address something like that if, let's say, it jumped to the top of your priority
Well,
list today?
I think it's funny you mentioned that, is that I think that I'm not sure that we have a casual restaurant, outdoor restaurant on property. And the statistic that I've constantly seen in all kinds of research is that guests at a particular hotel, whether it's mine or anybody else's, that something like under 15% of those guests will actually use restaurant on premises. And
Hmm.
I'm not sure, I think everyone has struggled to figure that out. And especially, in our model, where most of the people, they're not on business trip. They're on, in our setting, they're on vacation or holiday. And it's they come and they want to experience whatever stay they have, whether it's 2 days or a week. They want to experience as much of the area that they're coming to as possible, which means they're going to use restaurants outside of the property. The way we've tried to address that is to get non-hotel guests more to come onto the property to use that food and beverage service.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're basically marketing them as separate things so that they are all standing up on their unique shoes, let's say, as unique experiences. That makes a lot of sense. So, one other point that I believe is important when it comes to that, both the ancillary revenue but also the recurring revenue, is returning guests, right? Do you feel like you currently have a good grasp on who are your best guests, on what they prefer, how often they come back, when they last visited? Or do you believe each stay is kind of standing on its own from scratch?
No, I think we have a pretty good handle on returning guests. We staff, again, the size of our property makes it a little bit easier to manage,
Hmm.
because we compile that list of who are our best guests, and it's an ever growing list. So when you see that reservation come in, that's a returning guest. What, in our notes, what they said they liked, what they said they'd like to see change. We do spend a lot of time asking people. It's always great to get great reviews, all right? But great reviews that's not the textbook of business. It's the complaints that are the textbook of schooling us on what customers want.
Hmm.
It's the complaining customer, believe it or not. And my theory is the complaining customer who's the most valuable guy, because they tell us what's wrong, give us the opportunity fix it. As an example, I read, because I'm able to do it because of the size of our property. I read every review that's written, and I respond to them. Part of my day is responding to reviews, whether they're positive, is to say, okay, someone at a higher level is responding to them. I learned a long time ago that in hospitality especially, actually probably in any business, the more responsive from the highest level does the most amount of good for the business. We've had customers who had, you know, horrible experiences with a broken air conditioning unit. There was no place to move them to, and you wind up giving them part of the stay back. Then you touch them and say, "Okay, sorry you had that." Coming from me, or it's coming from another senior manager sometime, and then they come back. They become some of your best customers.
I agree. And how many reviews do you feel that is? I mean, on a week by week basis, it sounds like it's still manageable, but what's the volume like?
Well, I would say we get, a few dozen reviews a week. It's, and sometimes in the middle of the busy season, which for us is July and August, sometimes that becomes hard to keep up with them. You start getting more reviews when busy you are. And so sometimes I don't get to them as quickly as I would like. but I always make sure that I tell the person that I'm responding to that, it's sorry it took me so long, but I still see this.
And you're the only one replying to this. I mean, the responsibility or the scope is on you to go through the reviews. Is that something that you do because
Well,
you like to be in front of it, or because it's kind of part of the job? So I guess my question.
everybody on the team uh, reads the reviews, and any one of us can respond, and sometimes have, depending on whether or not someone reads a review early in the morning. They think that shouldn't wait for me to respond to it at 10 o'clock in the morning. All right, they'll respond to it, and they'll let me know that they respond, and
Hmm.
it just the reviews is my from the 30,000 foot level that I'm functioning at. The reviews for me are telling me, what it is, where the weaknesses are in the operations, and what needs to be improved. And sometimes you look at a review and you say, is that a legitimate, you know, complaint or not? And you go, okay. And sometimes it's amazing. A lot of times you'll get these amazing 5-star reviews. And they'll say, at the end, they'll say, but it would be nice if you did this, you know?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so you go, okay, you know what? That's a valid point from someone who likes the property.
Over time, how do you make sense of? I mean, one thing that I've heard, for example, it's impossible to please everybody, which I believe. I mean, it's everybody have different preferences and different things that pet peeves and whatnot. So, how do you build trends of things that are, common requests, for example, or common issues? Do you have a way to map it out over time, or is it mostly kind of on a one by one basis?
Yeah, we've actually gone through and created a spreadsheet that has when reviews met. Now with AI, it's a lot easier to do. You don't have to create the spreadsheet. You can just run through them all and then find the common language, get a sense very quickly of what's the most common thing that people would like change or
Hmm.
don't like about. And so it gets a lot easier. I mean, like every other business in the world, we're now looking at AI like, hey, this is a great tool for us to be able to get information quicker from more diverse sources.
AI is one of those things that it's almost impossible for it not to come up during these conversations that we're having, because we're living in that age, right? That age of AI. From what I've been able to tell, adoption levels vary widely, right? I mean, some people are just not interested in using it. Some people are scared to use it. Some people are building these incredible agentic systems with it. And like in your case, it sounds like you are somewhere in the middle of that path where you are dabbling with AI, you know it has power. So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being, we barely use it, we are cautious about it, and 10 being I'm on top of the latest tools and maximizing it as much as we can, where would you position yourself in that scale?
I would say we're probably and I think this is true of many businesses, even outside of us. I think there were maybe a three. The best we can do, we're at a 3 or a 4.
Hmm.
It's the AI. One of the things that about it is that why people are struggling with what to do with it. The change is coming too quickly. There's
Hmm.
too many tools too quick. And it's like you can, the analogy I use, I say it's like understanding AI is like trying to drink water from a fire hose. Just coming so quickly and so in such a volume that business advice I give to people in the business community and in our business is pick 1 or 2 tools you think you can use, concentrate on learning how to use those, and you can gradually expand from that. And it's just, too much information to absorb at any one time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think that that analogy is just perfect. I mean, that's why so many people struggle with AI adoption and understanding where to plug it into their business without sacrificing quality and without sacrificing potentially even security. So I think that is on point. So I would like to pivot very quickly back to something we touched on briefly, which has to do with the restaurant and the F&B as a whole, right? The F&B portion of it. First, would you say that constitutes a significant part of the experience that you're overseeing, like the restaurant and the food and beverage service?
Yeah, I think especially on big holiday weekends, that busiest time in the F&B portion of our business. And it's an interesting dynamic in that, like back in 2012, when we opened the property, there was a different set of customers than there are now. It's, and then, so you catered your F&B to those customers. The issue that stands out more blatantly is the fact that, F&B, you got your food, and then you've got your, alcohol consumption on property. And it's the Gen Zs and even some millennials who are getting older are consuming less alcohol. So that can't be, you don't want to factor in. If you ask me, how much did I make revenue off of, say, alcohol sales, beer, wine, liquor? And 10 years ago, I give you this number. And then I look at it now and I go, it's a different component. And you have to adjust your F&B policies to the changing tastes of generational people that are coming. So as an example, we have more in the last 2 or 3 years, we have more non-alcoholic beverages available at the bar than ever before. And that's because that's subset of customers that's what they want. They want that availability. Or, sometimes it's non-alcoholic, sometimes it's low alcohol. And I think that if, anyone who's running a restaurant, either on a hotel property or independently, needs to know that that's a changing dynamic that does not seem to be something you're going to do advertising wise is going to reverse that.
Well, that's a fascinating take. It's a fascinating take, but also brings me to a question. How do you know that these trends are happening over time where people are ordering less of this? And also, is it seasonal, for example? Well, and here's my question. How do you manage inventory and ordering now? Is it gut feel, like you can tell from the financials that this is being sold less and this product is being sold more? Or is there a system that is linked to inventory that allows you to very accurately order just what you need? How does that work?
Well, we do know exactly, what is sold in any given day or any week, and you can, it doesn't take long to be collecting that information to understand what the trend is. And we try to use a just-in-time inventory system where we're only ordering shipments in, not a massive amount. We don't order for the whole season. We order for maybe a week or two at a time, and then we adjust our ordering patterns based on consumption.
Hmm.
And that's on the beer, wine, and liquor component of it. Food, it's a little bit more of a challenge, but you know,
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I've heard from peers and operators that their food cost typically runs 4 to 6 points above where they believe it should be. So it's a big problem. It's an ongoing challenge that's always been there. It sounds like you have a pretty good grasp on it, but do you still believe that's the case, that your cost typically runs a little higher than you do want it to be?
well, I think if you're asking me at this exact moment in time, I think that's true. It definitely, with inflation being the way it is, and it's just food costs. So
Hmm.
you hear that from everyone you talk to. Food costs are up, and people are moving away. As we follow the research in the F&B component of our business, you see the higher end, the guys that are running these big chains and stuff. You see them moving away from the full white tablecloth restaurant scene to a more casual, because I think that easier to manage the casual dining section. It's a little bit easier than higher end marketplace. If you're running a white tablecloth restaurant, not so easy, I should say, to maintain food costs.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think you're seeing a lot of properties, including some of the big chains, moving that way where they're putting more casual stuff on property than they previously had.
That and from everything we've discussed, the necessity to be more efficient with systems, right? So that you're not overspending on things because everything's so expensive now. But yeah, I agree 100%. And what about staffing and schedule? Oh, sorry, Larry. Do you have an extra?
No, I think that COVID and 2 years of the COVID epidemic here in the U.S. and in our marketplace created unrealistic expectation on both hotels and restaurants. It was because there was little else you could do. people were going away to hotels after the first initial shock of it. Hotels, including us, restaurants, got spoiled by this is going to go on forever. All right. And those are some, believe it or not, the COVID years, and I hate to say this because so many businesses suffered in our marketplace, these were some of the best years we ever had.
Mhm.
But I kept saying, I don't think this is going to last because once the epidemic is kind of over and under control, and in the past, you're not going to have that. It's going to be harder to get those guests on property and get those guests into your restaurant.
How are you preparing for those challenges that you see already in the horizon?
Well, I think if you can't control, and it's very difficult, there's a ceiling on how much you can charge for anything, whether it's hotel rooms, whether it's food and beverage, there's a ceiling on that. And it's the only strategy you have to make yourself financially viable is to keep raising prices. I think that's not sustainable in the long run. So you have to look for ways, if you can't control the amount of revenue that's coming into the property, the next best thing is to be able to control the cost of what your services are. So you have to be focused on, driving those costs down, getting more efficient. And a lot of people I encounter think, oh, they're looking for that silver. Well, when they come, they talk and we're sharing experience. They're looking for the silver bullet. What's the one or two big things I could change that'll just change the whole dynamic? And the reality of it is that it isn't one or two things. It's like dozens of little small things.
Wow. Well, like you said, there's no silver bullet, but is there a particular decision that you can recall to that you or somebody in your team made, let's say within the past year or two, that you believe moved the needle a little bit more than many of these other smaller things that are typically going on?
Really move the needle. That's an interesting question. I think that it's the way we attract because we do have events on property. I think that between our creative director and our operations director, they came up with some events on property that wound up attracting a lot more people than we expect. They did brand partnerships with other brands, like a collaborative kind of a marketing act, which I think was very successful as for us as a property have a brand on property where they're benefiting by the exposure to the amount of guests we have. We're benefiting on the fact that that brand being on property attracted, attracted a different set of customers who probably would not have come on property.
Do you get many RFPs like for events exactly, or people that are looking to use the venue for their own activities, for example, or the catering service, even if that's something that you offer? Is that a considerable part of your operation, or more of a nice to have in your book?
It's a small component of our property. Our property's not set up to deal with large events that need an indoor space and stuff like that. It's not. So we tend to be, private events and stuff like that tend to be smaller things. Dinners, a brand as an example wants to throw a dinner, 50 people. That we can do.
Mhm.
When someone wants to throw a wedding for 250 people, we can't do that. So we concentrate on those smaller events. I would say it varies. Sometimes it's a decent chunk of the revenue. Other times it's not, but we don't count on that. We count on the smaller events. And if there turns out to be a little bit bigger or more quantity of those events, we count that as a bonus.
Has it ever floated around to, I mean, you're saying you're not counting on it, which it's fair given that that's not the primary core of your business, but has it been brought up that, maybe it's a little bit more focus or just be dropped altogether or strategically, right? From that strategic perspective, it sounds like it's being kind of put aside and considered, but ultimately not put a lot of investment of time and money into. Is that likely to change for you soon, or do you believe that's going to be the case
No,
indefinitely?
I think in our case, it's the nature of our business is and our location, and so we concentrate our biggest partners on stuff like that are because we know a lot about our customer. So we have a marketing deck for people who want to be sponsors or want to be on prop that tells them. exactly who the demographic is on property on any given day or any given weekend. Because we have that information presented in a logical format, when you go out to a brand, and we have some outside folks that we work with that will look for those brands, look for the more upscale brands, what we're attracting to our property. And then when they can show them what it is very quickly in a in a printout of what's the demographics and how much we know about that demographic, all right, that makes it easier for them to consider. That's a process where you have to do that pretty early in the year because most of these brands budgeting happens back in, at the last quarter of a year for in the first quarter of the new year for that year to come.
Mhm. Okay. So just to kind of close the loop on some of these operational challenges, the one other one that I hear often come up is the staffing and scheduling. I keep hearing this is a big time sink. Many people are still doing that manually. So in your case, is it systematized? How do you work coverage? Is it systematized? Is it a lot of phone calls and texts? Is it very real time? I mean, just all around, how do you schedule people for their shifts?
Well, it's because we know what the peak hours are on property for use of like the the F&B component and stuff, and how many people this we're expecting. It's easier for us to schedule those things. I mean, the greater challenge on labor is actually in our marketplace is finding labor. It's you It's a very, our market, end of Long Island, it's a super affluent area when you come out here, right? But it's the downside to that is that there's very little housing available for staff in for that season. So, I mean, we invested in staff housing a number of years ago, so we get a large percentage of our staff returns because we have housing. But that's housing and labor shortages is the challenge for anybody, almost no matter what marketplace you're in. It's in hospitality, the H-2B visa issue in America is a nightmare. They
Hmm.
they don't allow enough visit users, and the current environment is just amplifying. So you can't, in hospitality, no matter what anyone says, you cannot fill it here in the United States. You cannot fill it with Americans, to fill those positions. It's just not possible. It sounds great, let's have everybody, be a local and stuff. And there's just markets where that's just not even possible. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges.
It's a very hard-hitting truth. And also, it's worsened by the fact that hospitality has a huge employee turnover rate. It's like 70 or 80%. It's like really, really high. And from what I've heard, the staffing, right? Like people don't want to come in, and have last minute shift schedule changes. Those are the smaller details that I believe are important to manage proactively. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I think that one of the major problems as I see it, as I talk to people in the industry, is I think there needs to be a cultural shift upon management and ownership. Is that you need to build a culture where everyone that is employed by you feels valued and sees some opportunity in their business. And I think when labor was super abundant, I think a lot of people got very sloppy with that and did not recognize that you need to create a culture where everybody from, you know, the lowest level employee to the highest level employee has a good feeling about working on the property or working in the restaurant. I don't think we've spent as management and ownership. I don't think we've spent enough time working on that. We spend a huge amount of time. I've always because I've come through other businesses before I came to hospitality. We spend a huge amount of time building that trust and relationship with everybody who works. So I'm running a seasonal business, but 75% of my staff that's not from the area comes back every year. So we think that the idea of building that culture is a successful strategy.
I love that. Yeah, that's, I believe, a common trend that many peers would probably agree with, and many are still struggling to find that sweet spot, I would say. So that is something that's working well. And as we approach the end of the time that we have here, I would like to ask you if there was one thing that you could fix about the operation as it runs right now, what would you put at the top of the list?
There was one thing that's a question. I think one of the mistakes I think I made early on when we first started the property, the first couple of years was I think as we were trying to build a management team, I think that I was too slow to recognized that the person that interviewed and hired was the wrong person, which was, your own ego says, wait, I hired them. That couldn't have been a mistake. So you let them linger a little bit longer than they can. If I could give advice to other operators, I would say is that if you've hired someone and they're the wrong personality for the property, make them available to the industry sooner rather than later.
Another hard-hitting truth, I would say. And since we're giving advice, one last question before we move into the lightning round. Let's say an operator asks you, where should they start in modernizing their operation, especially if they're an independent operator? What advice would you give them?
I think that what do you call it? I think they've got to concentrate on the management team. Anyone who's in a management or supervisory role, they need to spend time everyone's you're trying to fill like all these positions throughout your organization. And the reality of it is that you can't control what goes on in the entire operation. Who controls that? The managers and the supervisors. So if I had to say one thing, I would say spend more time figuring out who the right managers to your property or your restaurant are, because they're the ones that are going to impact the performance of the performance of everybody on property. Is going to be tied to how they feel about their individual manager.
Okay, perfect. So right before I let you go, Larry, one quick lightning round. Bring up the first thing that comes to mind. No overthinking, just the very first thing that pops in your head. Few questions. So let me start with this one. What is the most overrated thing in hospitality technology right now?
Most overrated thing, I think it is the CRM.
The CRMs. Okay.
Like somebody said that.
Yeah. That you would be the second person to say that. So what is the one system that your operation couldn't run without?
Couldn't run without. I think we couldn't run without our F&B manager.
And outside of the hotel, or outside of Montauk House, what's the best hospitality experience that you have had as a guest, and what made it stand out?
I would say the Ritz-Carlton. It's like there's no that they're the gold standard in hospitality. They do an amazing job empowering their employees.
So, what do great operators do then that the average ones are not doing?
I think the great operators build a culture. You talked about the turnover in hospitality. I think a great operator is the one who builds that culture that reduces that turnover to well below industry standard. You look at an industry standard, you go, oh, okay, I'm a few points below that, and you think that's as good as it gets. I'm doing well. That's wrong. That's wrong. You should be trying to drive that number down to near zero. That's what because if you keep that staff on longer, all right, they're more experienced. They understand what the guests want. They're gonna pay for themselves easily.
Right. Last but not least, and I have a hunch about your response to this one, but what would you be doing if you were not in hospitality today?
I would be doing something that I like the idea of serving people and helping people. I could be doing anything that interacts that helps people. In my case, in hospitality, we're helping people have a good time when they're in the hotel and on the property, right? And to me, there's nothing better than that feeling that you get after you help somebody have a good time or solve a problem that there's a name for that. It's called helper's high. And it's an emotional response that your body has to that good feeling that you get. I would definitely be in some service business.
Well, on that beautiful note, then, Larry, we're coming to the end of the show. This was a great conversation. I loved how candid and transparent you've been about the challenges of the industry. I think it's rare that somebody speaks so openly about what they are still struggling with, let's say, but also about what they're doing great and where they've figured out formulas that actually work for them. We always land on that culture is a great, very important thing to take care of, which clearly you are part of that group. But again, thank you so much. Larry, where can our listeners follow what you're doing? Where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on Facebook. They can find me on my new project, which is my digital mind on Delphi. Uh, it's a new concept. I think I briefly mentioned it in the previous conversation, but that's the most interesting place you'll find.
Mhm. Quick disclaimer coming clean here, Larry. I actually spoke to your digital mind. I was asking your digital mind which questions they thought would be great to ask you during the podcast. So very cool stuff.
All right.
Uh,
Sounds good.
Thanks for listening to Deep Current by Oceans. This was Larry. If you're a hospitality operator facing some of the challenges that Larry discussed here today, we'd love to keep that conversation going. Find us at oceansco.com. Until next time.
Thank you so much for having me.